Becker argues that the problem is not necessarily that we're using our culture and our worldviews to come to terms and make meaning about mortality or come to terms with, but the problem is the fact that we're so motivated to use those worldviews often to deny mortality rather than come to terms. So for example, like just look at our culture, everything is about staying as young as possible, looking young. Like there's, especially I guess Western culture, there's just this real ageism, for example, and just the fact that, again, in, as Becker calls them, immortality projects, the goal is to make a name for yourself and live on, and not have to feel like, not have to just accept impermanence in some ways. We're really motivated to just hold on to that. And so that can be a problem because, so, and again, I guess it's not even necessarily the problem that we want to create something that lasts. The problem is that if we're so motivated to deny the impermanence and mortality and not come to terms with it in any way, then that can often create us being kind of so desperate to ease that anxiety or not deal with it at all, that anytime that something kind of does challenge that, we're just so defensive because we haven't developed the skills to just cope with the fact of impermanence at all. It's more like we just, nope, don't want to hear it. We're going to derogate other people who have that different worldview. No, they're backwards. They're the crazy ones. We are right. And I think he kind of argues like, that's why his book is called The Denial of Death. No one is denying that our body will die one day. Like, it's a little bit of a misnomer because often people just get defensive from the title. Like, what do you mean? Of course I know we're going to die. Like, people don't actually believe they're immortal, at least on this earth, again, regardless of your religious views. But so it's kind of, it can be a little confusing, but what he means by denial of death is like our resistance to dealing with it, and our like staunch adherence and like clinging to these things that can sort of help us not deal with it and kind of be like la 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 la, you know. So that's the real problem, not necessarily that we have these culture and worldviews and things to help us have the larger meaning. The problem is how we can become just, I guess, blindly adherent in some ways.
Yeah, it's like, at what cost? Like, denying fine, but at what cost? And as we know, considering the state of our society, there's huge costs that we're coping with that could be, you know, one thing I just feel is like we don't have a very good ability to imagine a different way of living or imagine a more peaceful world, or like we don't believe it's achievable. And I think that part of these reactions, because we'll like, bam, just hit ourselves with these denials when we're feeling that stress or that doubt or insecurity. And belonging is a key part of overcoming this, feeling like you belong. And I think that's another place our society really makes it harder on people to feel like they belong, where we, you know, we're into othering for the most part. Also, Lila, forgive me if I missed it, but did you tell Cameron about the judges study? Because I think that would be a really important one just for the audience. Yeah.
Just for a quick, yeah, you're right. I didn't give like a concrete example. And I can, yeah, so I'll do that. And also just one more thing, like you said about the cost, like at what cost, I was going to say that when you look at something like, as Deborah said, like we're so motivated to not, or to put that off, that if you look at what that's doing to our society, if you look at something like climate change, that is a huge death reminder, regardless of, I feel like even for people who, whether or not you're super invested in and you think our environment is more at risk or less, like people vary on that. But no matter what, as soon as people start talking about that, it is a death reminder, because the argument is that eventually our planet could become uninhabitable for humans, or that it could have these extreme results and really hard living conditions. And that really can bring up mortality. And what's interesting about that is, if we have such a denial of mortality and an inability to deal with that knowledge, that actually results in even further distancing from the environment. And what we see with the research, and from terror management theory has done several studies on climate and the environment, is that oftentimes after bringing up mortality, we see people have an increase in desire for consumption and a sort of decrease in how much they care about environmental wellness. And so it's literally bringing up sort of the urgency and like the we're all going to die if we don't deal with this. That can backfire, because if people can't kind of cope with mortality in general, what they're going to do is just push that away completely and not deal with it at all, rather than doing like some smaller things that they could do. So like that's one example of a cost where it's like, if we're not dealing with this, we're exacerbating a problem that exists, because it's reminding us of something that we don't want to deal with. And so instead of dealing with the problem, we're just like, well, I just would rather that not be a problem. And so again, it can inform sort of different ways of messaging, but also just it kind of illustrates that there's this larger underlying, we need to deal with this in a different way rather than always going to denial. And so as we like to say at EBF, it's kind of about finding the best, healthiest illusion, not really illusion, but something that, meaning that harms the least amount of people.